Hey YouTube, it's Dimitri, and today I'm going to be presenting the Ai4 2025 presentation that I did. I was on a track that was focused on how do you maximize return on investment. My presentation is called Shoot for the Target, Not for the Stars, kind of hinting at the fact that most companies these days in 2025 seem to be trying to shoot for the stars, create massive AI projects, specifically in the LLM space. But I'm going to show you guys there are a lot lower hanging fruit, easy projects where you can put AI, where AI is more of a broader term of automation through smart technologies and modeling, of course, because this channel talks about quantitative finance and we focus a lot on modeling. But we're going to talk about how do you maximize that return on investments while implementing AI into your business. So 25 to 50% of all tech projects fail. This seems about right. That's a pretty big range here, but that's typically what we see here. When we move into the AI space, though, we are seeing about 70 to 85% fail. And I'm seeing a lot of people saying it's even higher than that. I've seen people go up to 90%, which seems pretty high as well. Again, failure just being more or less, we're not hitting some sort of target here. So I'm gonna use failure as a broad term, right? Failure in these cases from 70 to 85% are projects that start, you invest a bunch of time and money in, and they don't complete. For this presentation, as I move forward, I'm going to say failure is any sort of project that has some sort of target return on investment, and we end up either the project does not complete, so it is a 100% loss of all the resources that were put into it, or more specifically, it's going to be a negative value project where, you know, maybe 5 years span here, we invested a bunch of money, we invested a bunch of tools, we automated something, but the cost we spent was much too large given the benefit that we're going to get out of this. So why are these projects failing? That's exactly what we're trying to address here. And there's really four main reasons for this, or four main categories, and I'm going to go into these specifically, but it's going to be planning, communication, data, and skills. So planning is the very first step in this process here, right? A proper plan will result in a successful project most of the time. It's not guaranteed, but at least it will get you a proper setup and a proper analysis before you even invest more resources into implementing some sort of AI solution here. Setting up the goal. So what is the goal for this project? Right? What are we trying to solve? What are the metrics around that? And I'm going to go into more examples here on the next slide. Also, ownership. So ownership seems to be one of these things that is very fluid. It is very well defined in the banking community where I come from. But as I start to step outside of that into the manufacturing spaces, into the tech spaces, we start to see that ownership is not a very rigid process here. This is going to be critical to getting a project across the deadline, across that finish line, right, and hitting that deadline. But it's going to be critical also for making sure it's a successful project moving forward, as it has to be maintained across time. And then finally, resources. Do you have the time? Do you have the people? And do you have the technology? Often I see people have 2 out of these 3 and they think that's enough. You've got to have all 3 of these if you're going to be able to complete some sort of AI project here. So for planning failures here, let's dive into these as with goals. So goals is going to be too big of a goal. I see a lot of firms. I was at a company that was going to do complete automation of model development or model validation, for example. And what they were going to do is you're just going to take data, you're going to give it a few guidances on what you want, you're going to dump it inside of this AI tool. Anyone's going to be able to do it. You're going to click run and it's going to get rid of an entire team. Now, this was long before LLMs, but the premise is still there that we dumped a ton of money into this project. Now, when the CEO of the firm found out this had been going for X amount of years, they did a presentation on it to catch up to see where they were at. There was no success. This project ended up dying right on the runway there, basically, where they'd already spent a bunch of time planning. They'd spent a bunch of time execution, doing development, getting all this built out, but they could never beat an actual human here. And a lot of this had to do with just poor planning. And realistically, the goal is too big. And what I mean by this is that model development is an entire process where you have, data quality, and then you have to go through the process of defining what your dependent variable is, and then you go through looking at models and trying out a variety of different models and doing all the testing, and then you go through the process of actually checking the results and fitting the model, and then you have documentation, you have model validation, this full runway of processes here. It's a lot of steps. It's a lot of work. Again, the goal was just too big. Trying to have one sort of automated tool or system to do everything under the sun was a guaranteed failure on the start because it was much too large of a goal here. Now, if you would have picked something much smaller, much simpler, much easier, for example, a lot of the banks are working on a lot of these simple, boring tasks like model documentation. Can we automate documentation? And now with LLMs into this would be pretty easy because you can give an LLM an agent. You can have a template that it's going to essentially fill out. The model developers, as they develop, can take notes and put it into a document. You can feed that document into the agents. The agents can go through and fill out your template and create a model documentation for you. So again, it's one sliver of the piece. It helps the developers out. It's absolutely critical for regenerating and going back and fixing models in the long run. But again, the goal needs to be scaled back into a more reasonable goal here. The goal isn't defined well enough. So I was been at many firms. We've built many models. Often they will wave their hands, the business side, and say, I need a model to do this, like price something else. Just do pricing for finance. It needs to do pricing. And so then you're like, okay, great, let's build a pricing model. And you dive in and you spend all this time and you build the model and they say, well, no, the pricing model needs to do this, 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 and this. And it has to have all these other outputs without this model here. Again, you never defined the goal up front. And so by the time a team goes through, builds out some sort of solution here, and then you get to the end of the project and they say it's not enough, you wasted all that time. Because often with a lot of these developments here in the AI space and in the quantitative model development space, it's not as simple like go in and just tweak things. And I've seen a lot of people try to do this. They'll spend all this time, resources, you got 3-4 employees on a project, you're 4 months into it, you deliver something, it's not great. And then you end up in what we call the patch phase. So this isn't really what you want, right? This is a Kia car, and you want a Lamborghini. Let me see if I can just patch this. Let's just cut the engine out, put in a V12 inside of this car, do some modifications. It's never going to be done right. You guys are going to have to start all the way over. If not, you will have a lot of tech debt or quant debt in this process, or AI debt, where you are going back constantly to maintain, fix, adjust, tweak a bunch of pieces and parts that just don't work well in the process here. So again, coming up with a clear definition with the business. So you're going to have development teams, you're going to have tech teams. Often there is an end user, which I'm going to call the business. That end user needs to define clearly exactly what they want out of that before the project spins out into an endless spending project and solutions aren't great at the end of this. And then finally, too complex of a solution. So as we're going through this, as I'm talking to a bunch of firms, as my business, Fancy Quant LLC, is up and running, I'm seeing that a lot of people are trying to take LLMs, for example, currently, and everything has to fit that. And I was talking to an individual, and they were showing me a problem they had in a manufacturing setting. And the solution was quite simple in a standard machine learning approach. The problem didn't deviate too much. The data was fairly stationary. There wasn't a lot of adjustments and changes in this. This could easily be done with some sort of decision tree process. Explainability was not critical in this. They just needed to make a simple decision out of this. And they were spending a ton of money and time trying to use an LLM. Why? Because it's trendy, it's fun, it's exciting. Let's see if we can get everything to fit into this LLM box. Again, it's too complex of a solution given the problem you had. So having actual experts look at the problems. So again, there's going to be some back and forth in the planning phases with the business side and your quants or your AI teams and your data scientists, trying to figure out, is there a simpler solution that we can generate quicker, faster, and cheaper? And most of the time I'm seeing there is. LLMs have a great use case in some areas, but a lot of the tools, a lot of the automation process, you could have a automated framework for a lot less money with the right people, less time, and better resources here. They're going to be cheaper. So getting that goal right is going to be a really important aspect to hitting a success and getting a win here. And also, don't forget to pick simple, small projects to start off with, which we're going to get into in a bit. But if you're picking the largest, most complex process and you're not an AI firm, you're not a model development firm, that's not your bread and butter, it's not where you make your money, pick small wins to get the team going, to build some morale there, to get some nice wins on the board that's cost effective before you start to take on really large critical projects for the firm. And then into ownership. So again, when you have no ownership of a project, and I'm not saying just the project is hand wavy, there's going to be the project, which is who owns the actual project. And there's going to be pieces and parts in the project that need owners that are going to own that from the inception of this goals and this planning, everything we're putting together, through the end of this, productionize, and all the way through the actual use cases here. As you can imagine, there needs to be different owners for different parts of this. There needs to be one team owner that really owns the project, drives it, coordinates, put it all together. And then you need to have different parts and pieces and individuals that own, for example, like the model development process or the business use case portion of this, or the monitoring of this use at the end of it, which again is going to be the business because they're the ones using it. They can give you live feedback with this. When you do not have proper ownership clearly defined, what ends up happening is you end up with fights at every single bump in the road. And I've seen this, right? Data comes out, data wasn't perfect, which was fine. Your development teams, your automation teams create some sort of solution for this. And then all of a sudden the business is upset because something doesn't work exactly how they wanted it. And they start pointing the finger back at your model development team. Your model development team goes, well, the data sucks. The data is not perfect. And so they point it back at the data team. And the data team sitting there saying, we didn't know any of these business requirements because we weren't brought into this probably. And so what we're having now is an issue of we don't really own it. It really goes back to the business owner on the end of it. And you have this big fight going on. A lot of this can be reduced, eliminated by simply having owners on who owns which portion, having the right people at the table during this planning, and making sure there's critical ownership within the whole process here, because this is critical. I've seen too many projects fail because of this. You also need some sort of vision and catalyst. The person that owns the entire project needs to eat, breathe, and sleep, as I always say. The process, the business, the understanding, the excitement to get things done. It is very easy now in the age of LLMs to get very excited and to read some documents. And, I've got this LLM stamp of approval on my resume somewhere. I'm so excited. And then it sorts of dies out as you start to get into the technical details of whether it's, machine learning, statistics, math, LLM, prompt engineering, data quality. Someone needs to be able to do all of that and be excited about that. Having a leader who is the catalyst for this, who's excited, who's driven, that can drive the vision of this, even in the times of the nitty gritty and the boring and the issues and the problems. That's going to be critical in this, and they're going to be the ones that need to own the entire project here. And this ownership might not be someone as obvious as you expect. It might not be your tech lead. It might not be the business. It might not be your model development team. There might be someone that's partially involved, a project management team, for example, maybe even an executive who really wants to get this done, who wants to coordinate and get involved in this. You need a visionary. You need someone who's going to drive this project. And then finally, no ownership often leads to projects quietly dying here. And I have seen this and it blows my mind, but you'll have a project, it gets given to some sort of team, like in the quant space here, you get an assignment to build a model to, get it going. Your team builds out this model and tool and they get it going, and then other projects start to come in and they get it to some point and they think it's kind of close enough to done, and they kind of mention it to the business, and the business says, yeah, it's fine, we'll take a look at it later. And then the project just slowly dies because all these other priorities are coming in, and all of a sudden it gets deprioritized. Now you're having to dig back 3-6 months. An executive, board of directors, someone comes in and says, where the hell is this project? What's the results of this? And it turns out that now we're trying to figure out, where's the state of this project? Did it complete model development? Was it validated? Was it productionized? Where's the final sign off on this? And realistically, what happened is the project actually slowly died. And it died behind the scenes, and a lot of other things took priority. To prevent this, you need ownership, you need that visionary leader, but you also need to make sure that you are on top of these projects and you have deadlines and it has priority. Often I see, especially with the AI space, something gets very excited, it's hyped, it's number one priority, do or die, we're gonna do this. And then 3 months later, because these projects take a long time to develop and build, it just gets deprioritized and it never gets finished, and you waste a bunch of resources because of that. And then finally, jumping into resources here, don't overvalue vendor tools. So I see hundreds of thousands of vendors out there. As I went to the Ai4 conference, tons of them emailed me, messaged me, we could make AI, LLMs, anything you need, just a simple click of a button, tons of consulting firms. Finance consulting AI firms that didn't know finance because I stopped and talked to them and kind of looked and listened to their conversations. They were more a consumer resource tool on the consumer side of this and the consumer process of this, but not actually on modeling and losses and running the actual business. Again, there's too many vendors out there. If you're going to be using LLMs, you're going to have some sort of dependencies on vendors, right? Because you're going to need to use some sort of model, whether it's, AI4's models like ChatGPT, if it's Claude, Gemini, you have to pick something to use there, and that's okay. But if you get too many vendors involved, I'm going to warn you, Most of these vendor products don't play nice together. They often don't fit the needs you have. And so you probably are better off in most cases trying to find a simple solution to your problems and only using vendors that you truly see adding value here. Don't bring on too many vendors, because then you spend a lot of time and a lot of resources figuring vendor issues out, putting vendor pieces together, and often projects can fail because of that, or costs can get massively overinflated as a project that was quoted at $150,000 ends up at, $600,000, $700,000, $800,000 project, because nobody had some sort of clear sight on how the vendor tools were going to work to solve your problem here. Self-learning, I'm going to put in here as well, is critical, and it takes much longer than people expect. As we're moving into LLM solutions, for example, or if you're going to move into newer methodologies, maybe your team hasn't done a lot of machine learning, or maybe you need to go back and look at more critical methods and simpler mathematical models. You're going to have some self-learning involved here. I know every company thinks, I'm going to go out and hire the best person to do A, B, and C. Everybody's still learning. The market is moving very, very quickly here. You need to plan in learning and downtime in these projects. Executive teams are way too pushy on this because they want results and they want them right now. And they want to get some sort of, big win for themselves on the books with, the other executives, the board, the investors, whoever else. You need to plan in some buffers in this process, and self-learning is going to be one of these that you should kind of plan into your team and not overwork your team on this, because you will have an issue with the resources here of your staff's not going to have the skills to do the job, or you're just going to be behind because you didn't plan these into the process and the planning phases here. And then finally, talk to all departments that are needed. I see too often that you get really excited and the core departments, like your model development teams here, get involved with this, and your business get together and they talk and they're excited and they're going to implement this tool. And then the tech team wasn't brought in properly, or another business department that's involved in reviewing the results of this that could also use this tool were not brought in. Make sure you bring in everybody into the process here right up front, even if you have to invite too many people in the beginning. And I hate having meetings with too many people in them, but start with too many people, figure out who really needs to be there, who's going to contribute to this project from beginning to end. Nail the list down, then you can scale it back, but make sure everyone's there. Too often you get halfway down the road, and I've done this before with teams, you get down the road and you realize another department needed to get involved. It adds another 3 months onto a project, for example, and now we're going to be over budget and our ROI is going to go negative. So again, make sure everybody is involved when you're going through the resource portion of the planning. Communication is going to be the next part here. Again, understanding the problems in great depth. So the business often understands their part really well. The technical side understands their part really well. So again, understanding the problem is the business side. So the technical teams, whether it's the tech team, your quants, your AI teams, your data scientists, they need to understand the business problem, and the business team needs to spend a lot of time really explaining and communicating across the aisle what is needed and what is going to be built. Now, the tech side of this, the quant side of this, your data side of this, right? They need to explain potential solutions. And I know from someone who builds solutions, I can't tell you the solution just from looking at your problem. We're often going to have to go in and trial and error some things out, see what's going to work best for you, given the data, given the tech that we have. But make sure you communicate from the tech side back to the business side, potential solutions, what they will look like and how they could potentially operate here. Again, and have this communication throughout the project. I see this a lot with different businesses where one party says one thing, they think they understand it, and it just ends up failing on this. So I would emphasize having them reiterate back to you what they understand. I know this sounds redundant, but I did have an issue with this in a past life in different areas where we were explaining how math worked. I wrote a bunch of math on the board, went through the examples of it. Everything was crystal clear. It's math, there's no ambiguity. And then it turns out the other party did not fully understand the math. And so when we have to go back and understand, there was some sort of additional explanation that needed to happen with that, we ended up resolving it and things worked out great. But again, it's more time wasted, more frustration between different teams because the communication between the business and the technical side, and even technical between technical and business between businesses, all that communication style, it leads to excessive amounts of dead time on projects, which eats into your investment and your returns here because there's just too much wasted meetings with too many people involved. Key hurdles that you're going to face with this within the communication part is going to be the data part. How much data do you have? Do you need more data? What are the constraints around it? Are there legal constraints? Is there access to data? Is there data that needs to be purchased? If you purchase data, is that, quality enough data to do the development, or is there going to be some sort of realignment that has to happen? Infrastructure as well. I'm going to put a big red flag here if anyone's doing LLMs. Your infrastructure most likely is going to have to change from what you are currently doing. You can't just plug and play. There's often going to have to be additions to this process that need to get adjusted so that you can utilize the LLM frameworks here. Now this comes into data, infrastructure, and security here. Again, how is the data being used? How is it processed? How are LLMs using it? Are you on a corporate account? Do you know it's not being used from other firms to train? There's a bunch of issues that go into this. This communication, understanding, and learning needs to happen as well. Again, understanding models, the assumptions behind those models, and the skills needed to execute these sorts of projects are all going to be hurdles that need to be clearly communicated throughout the process. I see too many tech firms get really, really excited. They think this is a pure tech venture. They're going to dive in here. They're just going to, plug and play a bunch of models, whether they're machine learning models, stats models, LLMs, anything like that. They think it's just going to be like, oh, it's fun in games when we plug everything together. And they find out at the end of the day, they don't have the math and statistics backgrounds to do the proper engineering and execution of these projects here. I can tell you, I've seen this. You need to be large and organized and have people that understand this entire process, and doing this sort of communication is critical in making sure these hurdles are cleared and you don't get stuck or hung up partway through some sort of project here and kind of kill your project on itself. And then finally, culture is critical. So I was at a firm where deadline did not mean deadline, and this drove me insane. And it turned out there were really three definitions of deadlines here. So one department thought a deadline was a nice, fun, frilly recommendation. October 5th, if we hit that, great. If not, don't worry about it. Not a big deal. It's just something we work towards. It's not really, a do or die deadline. It was a nice, frilly thing to have. And then the second definition of this was, it is a deadline, meaning you will do or die have it. However, you can renegotiate that deadline if you see some sort of issue or hurdle along the way. And then the final definition, which was my definition, is do or die, you will hit that date. That is literally a deadline. It's dead. It's dead on that line, right? That's exactly where that project has to hit. So if we're working, 80 hours a week to get it done, we've got to do it because that's the deadline. Culturally, there were three different definitions of this. This created a lot of issues where some teams were significantly further behind because there was not a lot of hurry. Some teams were killing themselves and overstressed out because the deadline was so strict. Some teams were in the middle and understood what was going on. There's not a right definition of deadline here, but your team needs to have some sort of culture where you understand what that actually means here. Again, how are failures treated in this? So as we go into the model development space, again, any portion of this AI space with ML and stats and math and LLMs and all that, when you try a bunch of different models or processes or solutions here and they all fail, how is that treated? Is everybody look at this and put extra pressure on, you're a loser, you failed, we're wasting resources, and people are jumping up, pounding the desk? Are we so lenient and lax that we're like, awesome, let's try 50,000 more things and let's not rigorously dive into the actual problems and solutions? Or are you in the middle here where you're looking at it like, okay, it's great you tried a bunch of things, let's learn from this, let's create a process from this, and let's figure out what we can do, and if we cannot do something, let's put together the case with a clear explanation of what's happening here. Again, in this space, when we looked at the beginning of this, especially in the AI space, and there's such a high failure rate, how you treat these failures, how you approach these failures as a corporation, as a team, that culture is going to impact talent. I can tell you I've seen too much criticality, too much yelling, too much screaming, too much pounding of desks at different firms across the industry, and this drives out top talent. They end up going somewhere else. The talent that ends up staying is talent that moves fast, that moves quick, that has simple solutions, lies, cheats, steals, and kind of masquerades and hides different parts of projects because failure is treated as something that's bad. Now, I've also seen on the tech side of this where everyone embraces the fail fast, fail whatever, nonsensical tech crap. In the finance space, you cannot just fail for the hell of failing, or people say controlled failure. It's too hand-wavy. I'm going to tell you that. You need to have a sort of culture. You need to have a sort of academic rigor that you understand how to fail, when to fail, why to fail, where the exploration is, and how to manage that. A lot of this is going to come from cultural design, having the right managers in place that understand the actual problems you're solving, understanding if that failure is necessary or not. It is very complex. can tell you this from a lot of experience in a lot of different firms. But how you treat failure on a cultural aspect is huge here. Meetings in progress go into the culture as well. How often do you meet? There are pros and cons of everything here. Some teams absolutely love daily check-ins. I hate them. I will not work on teams that do agile. I don't like this process. I don't need to be micromanaged. Again, but it depends on the teams. I've seen teams that do daily check-ins and they thrive. And they've done extraordinary work on this, really getting through progress updates, working together, having synergies here. Again, what is the culture? How do you build it? How do you maintain it? And then finally, acknowledgement and celebrations, right? How do you acknowledge key success within employees? How do you celebrate those wins? And again, you're going to have this wide range of scale. I've seen companies that celebrate everything from somebody, being able to tie their shoe in the morning, to companies that don't celebrate anybody because nobody's really changing the world overnight. So how you do that acknowledgement, how you do that celebration, again, needs to be considered when you build in team culture here. Your team culture is going to impact the ROI here. I know this sounds ridiculous and hand-wavy and very HR and, happy-go-lucky, but at the end of the day, how you manage the teams, how you build this culture will impact the performance, the results, and also retention of talent here. And that leads us into data. Again, culture and communication, as we talked about, are critical in the data process within this space of AI. Again, availability. Do you have the data infrastructure to even do what you're wanting to do? Too many firms think they can just wave their hands and run stuff and it will just work. That's not how it is. You need to look at data infrastructure. Does your data exist? How are you going to access that data? Who has access to that data? I've been in a lot of firms where accessing data can be a challenge for different teams. This actually slows down the process. And yes, there are security reasons for this where I've been onboarded at a company. It took 3 or 4 months to even get me access to all the data I needed. And then there's also going to be a cost piece. How much does the data cost? Do you currently own the data? A lot of times you don't. You're going to have to go out and buy that data somewhere. You're gonna have to mine that data. Even if you go out and mine it, that takes time and effort and resources and servers and all that. And then finally, was the data part assessed in the planning phases? If not, this is gonna be something that's gonna be a bit of a hurdle and something hard to get over here. And then I'm just gonna hit quality here as a big asterisk to the Six Sigma training as well. I've worked in data governance with their teams as well. The ones I like here from Six Sigma are gonna be accuracy, completeness, consistency, timeliness, validity, uniqueness, integrity, and reliability. All of these impact the solutions you can or cannot build. You can give a team of quants or AI or ML or data scientists a bunch of data, and if you're missing some of these quality issues within the data metrics, the data is not going to work for this project. It's not going to generate a proper solution. So even though you have the data, even though you have the problem well defined, there's going to be no proper solution that will be meaningful for the business on the end use because you have a bunch of data issues. Going back and fixing that can be a 6-month process. It could be a 3-year process. Again, you need to be prepared and on top of this because data issues can kill a project partway through, and now you waste a lot of time in that process doing the planning and getting all the other pieces put together. And then size. So let's talk about data size here because as we get into LLMs, we're talking about we need a lot of data. But let's look at this more generally from problems. How much data is required to build a reasonable solution? People think that size matters, and it does. It does play some sort of impact here. But imagine I gave you a super small data set and I just copied and pasted it over 1,000,000 times, and now you have a huge data set. Is that a good enough data to build some sort of model on? No, it is not, because you do not have uniqueness, which is part of that data quality issue here. Again, cleanliness within your data as well, completeness and consistency as we look at the data qualities. That is going to impact the building of that data and that model on the end use and that automation process here. Again, you need enough data, you need enough unique data, you need enough meaningful data, enough quality data here to build some sort of solution. I've seen stellar solutions built on 100 to 200,000 observations in the finance space. Within the credit side of this, I've seen great models built on 4 terabytes of data, which was back sampled down to, I think, like 100 to 200 gigabytes. So again, how much data you need depends on the problem you're solving. There's also this issue of should you purchase data? I'm going to put a red flag on this one as well. Purchasing data is risky. It is required sometimes, but just because you purchase data does not mean it's going to meet all these quality metrics we see here in the middle. It also might not be the same that your business operates in. So a lot of firms, a lot of companies go out and buy market data, industry data here, thinking that they're in the same industry as a whole, but the reality is you operate in some sort of silo, some sort of specific niche often. And so having really large, massive industry data sets might not even be helpful. Again, how do you weigh this? When you do your development and your automation here, especially if you're using any sort of model, you need to consider the fact that there is a caveat. There is this red flag sitting there, and there are ways to statistically look at it and try to get some sort of judgment of how representative of your data this sample is that you ended up purchasing here. This could kill a project. This might end a solution. There might be a nice, pretty solution if you have the right data, but if you don't have the right data, you're not gonna be able to build the right solution for this. So keep that in mind. And then let's go to skills. So skills, I'm going to tell you, is actually the hardest part of this entire process. You can buy servers, but going through this process of building out team culture, getting the right people in place, as we see a talent war going on right now in the tech space, this has been going on for a long time in the quant space. Right now, AI talent has been critical. You do not need AI researchers. You need engineers for most problems here. Most of you are not working in the actual AI research space. Gonna put that out there. That's why a lot of these salaries are exorbitantly high, because this is AI research that's gonna be looking at building and developing LLMs. It's not on how do you use some sort of LLM like a llama model, how do you use that for your specific problem, how do you just build agents. How you use a model versus how you build a model are two very, very different teams. And understanding that process is going to be critical in actually getting your project across the finish line here. But pipelining this and looking at the steps, the people, and the processes you need is, a really important part with this. And I see too many people don't understand this here. So the way I view this, and typically is you have the business at the beginning that defines some sort of problem, gets passed down. You have a data team that needs to process, get quality, make sure the data is there and processed. That gets transferred into your quant team, your ML engineers, your AI engineering teams that are going to be building out some sort of solution for this. And they're going to build the model. Then that gets passed typically to what's called validation. I would argue every firm needs a validation team. And no, this is not tech validation where I put this data set in and I get this result out, and then your validation team does a similar test to see if it tests. We call that UAT, user acceptance testing. That is not validation. Validation in the finance space and the quant space is actually going back through the development process that the development team went through and reviewing all of the assumptions, decisions, issues that you had, and seeing if those make sense. And as a third party outside of this project, would you make the same decisions, and why or why not? So that needs to go through a full validation process. And then finally, you go into implementation of this. So finance space typically have quant devs. You'll have a bunch of other people in production implementing these things and doing all the pipelining of your data and your setup and your automation pieces that you need. And then finally, it gets implemented into some sort of in tool and production into the business side. Then the business needs to look at it and make sure it works and that entire pipeline is operating properly. If you have a bottleneck anywhere in this pipeline, this will slow down projects to a complete stop. And I've seen this. It's a critical issue because you think you have the right teams. All of a sudden, something happens on a team. A bunch of people start leaving. Again, it's multi-departmental. And now you have one department that has an issue that impacts the entire project or a bunch of different projects because your pipeline's broken here. Again, as you go through this as well, the pipeline linear process here helps you break out ownership as well. Who owns which parts of this? Again, you need some overall owner. But having people that own different chunks and parts of this makes the communication part more streamlined. It can get projects through this process much quicker as long as everybody understands the pipeline itself. And then management with this is going to be the big piece. How do you acquire talent? How do you retain talent is a big question that companies have been arguing and fighting over for years. There are tons of business books written on it. Again, every team I'm going to argue is very differently here. So if you're a tech team doing pipelining and setting up APIs and doing implementation, that talent, that acquisition, that retention will be very different than a business case, the business that's using it, which is very different than your ML engineers, your quants, your model developers here. How do you go through that process? I think too many firms undervalue the fact of it is extremely expensive to replace employees, whether it's internal knowledge, skills, or expertise here. How do you comp people? We talked about culture. That plays into the retention piece of how you keep this going. And then also for the management side of this, cultural development is your responsibility of your team. As you move up the hierarchy in a business, it is that individual's responsibility to maintain culture beneath it. So it kind of layers on itself and you have subcultures that kind of nest into one big corporate culture. Bad corporate culture will cause projects to fail, can cause excessive expenses here. So that's a critical part that has to be managed and maintained. And then finally, prioritization. Who's prioritizing these projects? Who's responsible for this? I have seen projects that are top priority. They're number one priority. We see this all the time. And then you get 2-3 months into a project and this is not top priority anymore. This other project is top priority. This constant reprioritization and moving and shuffling around is a huge management failure. When you see this, you have a poor management team here. So be critical of the prioritization and how things are being organized and structured and getting done. Now, of course, you're gonna have an emergency project or something that comes up and it needs to get reprioritized. I get it. I understand. But I've seen a lot of employees, myself included, complain when your projects continually get shuffled and moved around here. And then finally, support. Where is the management team on supporting this sort of process? So your direct manager, the team leads, who's involved in this project? How are they providing support? When you have an issue, are they helping you do the communication part? Or is this just a free-for-all and some managers waving their hands and wanting some sort of automation solution of AI and they just want it done? And then I have top talent on the very bottom here is extraordinarily rare, okay? I've worked through a career, 11, almost 12 years into this across a variety of different areas from fintech to banking to consulting, doing model development, model validation, model implementation, and internal audit. I will tell you, finding top talent is extremely rare. It is so hard to find excellent people. There are a lot of average people. There are fewer good people. There are very few that are just absolute excellent top talent here. Do what you can to keep it because even though it might seem expensive, whether it's the retention part of this, I can tell you the acquisition piece will kill the retention piece. It is much more expensive to acquire new top talent than it is just to retain what you have. Try to figure out the core issues in the management style here to keep top talent on and to keep this pipeline that we have here on the left flowing and at some sort of constant rate here. As part of this on the model development, ML engineer, quant space as well, AI and ML is moving very, very fast. Having the culture that supports learning is critical. Now, I have seen companies that embrace it. They say they embrace it, but they do not provide the time or the resources for the employees to stay up on cutting edge resources. So what do? They constantly go hire new talent. So they keep acquiring new talent and that new talent never stays because the retention piece, part of this is the learning process, is not done. Now, I will give you an example on books here. And don't get me wrong, almost everywhere I've been has had some sort of library of quant textbooks, banks, fintechs, consulting, like they've been available. But a lot of these places, they do not give you the time, downtime, I'm going to call it, or self-learning time to keep up with what's new or cutting edge. So what they ended up doing is bringing in new talent. And then they wondered, why is it that we are losing top talent? Why do we have a high churn in this quant space here? And what was ended up happening is, again, there was some support, but they did not provide the support necessary to get time to do self-learning. Now, this is very common across firms. I know we are busy. Almost everywhere I've been, we prioritize profits. We try to run and seek the next project to get it done, to hit the deadlines. This is common almost everywhere. But I'm going to tell you the top firms, those that are in the top, 5%, 1% of firms in the quant space, give excess time to the employees to do self-learning. It is an expectation as part of the job. It is not profit generating, but it will pay off in spades later down the road as these employees will come up with newer, innovative solutions because they have the time to do that. And then finally, putting all this together here, right? So to get positive ROI on this, you have to get the entire process set up. Too many firms are going from not even crawling yet, and they're wanting to run a marathon, and they're wanting to do complete AI. But I'm seeing a lot of skips. And what I mean by this is firms have a analytics team, which is what is the average, what is the current performance, how are we doing? And they say, okay, we're going to skip over all of traditional modeling, statistics, ML, and all that, and we're going to jump straight into AI, and we're going to do LLMs, and it's going to solve every problem out there for us. You don't have these pieces we talked about, the planning experience, the communication, the data, the skills. You're missing this piece. You need to learn to crawl, and then to walk, and then to jog, and then to run. You need to build this here. If you are dead serious on using AI and ML and modeling as a whole, because a lot of these firms are missing traditional modeling here, you need to make this a core competency. This is not something you go buy 2 or 3 vendor products, you slap them in, you hope they work, and everything works fine. If you're doing non-critical projects, you just want to kind of dabble here and there, go for it. Do a vendor product here and there. But to really get positive ROI on model development, whether it's AI, ML, stats, math, the whole gamut here of any sort of process here of modeling, you need to have all these pieces in place. You need to have the planning, the communication, the data, and the skills all put together. I know this is really hard to do. I've never seen anywhere do it perfect. It is so hard to get all the pieces together to do it. But those that seem to do better on average on the coordination skills here as well tend to do the best. And I know this sounds a little odd, but you might be an expert in the skill side of it and projects are failing and they're super expensive. And it's because you're missing one of the other three pieces, or it's just so poorly done, you cannot execute here. I hope you guys have this takeaway from this, that pipeline itself is critical, understanding the pipeline, analyzing the pipeline, and then diagnosing with one of these 4 issues in that pipeline where that issue is kind of sitting. That is going to get projects across the finish line on time and on budget. So that's how I would go through the process of maximizing ROI in the model development space with AI, ML, stats, and math. So anyways, thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. And as always, until next time.